Meanwhile, the British government kept a watching brief, not least on Charles Badeau, who had arrived in Berlin 2 weeks before the Windsors' visit. Oh, yes, they kept their eye on Badeau because while they're in Germany, Badeau was not seen on that trip. Anybody who was anybody knew he'd planned it. But he wasn't seen on that particular trip because meanwhile, he was too busy trying to plan a new trip. And where do you think that was supposed to be? America. Now, I feel like the reason he was saying let's go to America was because there was a little bit of a, and when I say a little bit, I'm being very understated. There was some bad feelings about the fact that they had gone to Germany. And so I feel like he was like, okay, let's send them to America, the land of, apple pie and good times. And, let's send them there. And it'll sort of make up for the fact that they've just been mucking about in the enemy's territory. All right, but anyway, the British was keeping a good close eye on Badeau. There were many reports were going back and forth between the intelligence agencies. Ogilvy's Forbes, who had been sort of a stand-in for the ambassador when he dipped out because he didn't want to be around, he had written back to the British government, and he said, I dined 2 nights ago privately with Protest Gilbert, basically somebody who was at the embassy, and he said, he raised the subject of the Duke of Windsor and His Royal Highness's intended visit to the United States. He also said that as a result of the approaches which Mr. Badeau had made to him, it was clear that this individual was, quote, running His Royal Highness and probably paying his expenses for the tour outside Germany. Much of the above will, I fear, be painful reading, but you ought to know what has been going on here, and that it would be as well to keep an eye on Mr. Badeau's activities. This letter, which I have typed myself, will not be put in the Chancery archives. So, people knew what was happening. They knew that David was not making his own decisions and that he had a whole core of people who were kind of helping him to make up his mind about what he should do next. David had spent his whole life being told what to do next. He hardly knew his own mind unless it was to have a fit. I also think that David was such a cheap person that he would be a very easy person to twist, because all you have to do is say, I'll pay, and he's like, all right, So if Mr. Badeau and all his colleagues want to send David to a tour of America, just like they send him on a tour to Germany, he'll go because he's, so long as he doesn't have to pay. And they're over there arranging all kinds of luxury and all kinds of, beautiful environments for him to exist in, and not a penny of his money is being spent. So of course he's going to stay with these people who are making life so easy for him. And it never seems to have dawned in his little head that perhaps he should be concerned about people who are so willing to hand over their purse. Ian G. Walker, responsible for organizing the American trip, wrote to the Duke, the reaction of the American press on your visit to Germany has been anything but favorable. The tone of the various newspaper articles implies that Your Royal Highness is in complete sympathy with the German National Socialist movement. So that little plan, the trip to America that Badeau has been cooking up is still in the works at this point. October 24th, Badeau, who was financing the trip, writing from Paris, Ritz, sent Lindsay the first draft of the complete schedule of visits. Like I said earlier, I can only assume that they felt that this new visit would sort of whitewash his last appearance in Germany. Go to America. They're, patriotic and love their country and are on good terms with England. If they receive him well, then, we can sort of all just forget about the fact that he was hanging out with Hitler. The visit would start in Washington on November 11th and finish in Los Angeles and San Francisco in mid-December. Shockingly, it had already arranged that the Duke would see President Franklin D. Roosevelt at the White House. His wife Eleanor would personally show him the housing projects in which she was involved, and then the Duke would lay a wreath at Arlington Cemetery and broadcast to the nation. Then, a private Pullman train had been hired to take them from the east to the west coast, and, you will not believe this, General Motors had put at their disposal a fleet of 90 of the latest Buicks. 90 cars? For what? Are they taking a different car every 30 minutes of the day? What in the world were they saying? We'll give you a fleet of Buicks, 90 cars for these two. What in the world? Somebody make this make sense. What is up with these people's unbelievable amount of luggage, vehicles, clothes, things, stuff? I mean, what is up with these people? 3 days later, Bedeau and his wife Fern set sail for New York in preparation. Also aboard the Europa, get ready for this, was Ernest Simpson, en route to marry Mary Rafferty. Just look at the way the lines are crossing here. I mean, my goodness gracious. Okay, well, inexplicably, Bedeau's over there trying to make inroads for them and going all the way to America to help the Windsors on this new trip. Like, what was Bedeau getting out of all of this, by the way? You know, like, what was the payoff here? I just don't understand why David would have been the fish to catch. I don't understand why so much mind was being paid to him. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is a person who could not bother with his birthright, who could not bother with the responsibilities that had been given to him, who had been king and thrown that away for his girlfriend. You know, and I just don't understand why anybody would give him the time of day and think, this is a person I'd want to work with. In fact, I will put a pause on everything I've had going on so far so that I can hightail it to America and, you know, get his itinerary set. I don't get this. The Windsors prepared for their new trip, sending a 7-page memo to the staff of the Bremen, the German ship that would take them to New York, outlining the requirements. This is so wild, because remember, they're not paying for 1 cent of this trip. That didn't stop them from their 7-page memo of all the stuff they'd need. Listen to this. It included service in the Red Room, a separate dining room set aside for them on the sun deck, provision for a special English blend of tea, and a barrel of London drinking water. A barrel of London drinking water? Where is the German ship going to get a barrel of London drinking water? Okay. The memo informed chefs that the Duke liked plain food, steaks and cutlets, and chicken for dinner. He preferred French dressing without mustard and only drank mineral water before cocktail time. So what did he need that barrel of London water for? He also enjoyed canapes of liver paste, Westphalian ham and rarebits. With dinner he liked red wine, but not white wines or champagnes, and had an after-dinner brandy with his coffee. So just make sure you don't mess that up. There better not be anything fancy or spicy or anything on that dinner table. He wants plain food. And if I don't see that barrel of London drinking water, well, I don't know how I'm going to make it across the passage. I can't get to the other side without my barrel of London drinking water. How am I going to live if I don't have my special blend of English tea? What about my separate dining car? God forbid I have to listen to somebody else chewing who isn't Wallace Simpson. Anyway, I mean, that's pretty high and mighty when you're not even the one that's paying for this trip. Can you imagine getting 7 pages of demands from anybody? At least of all this guy, it's like, who do you even think you are? King of what now? On November the 2nd, the day after the Bedeaus arrived in New York to finalize arrangements, Sumner Wells, the U.S. Undersecretary of State, reported his talks with the British ambassador Ronald Lindsay. He said, the ambassador said rather significantly that there recently had been a widening of the sentiment of indignation because of the fact that the active supporters of the Duke of Windsor within England were those elements known to have inclinations towards fascist dictatorships, and that the recent tour of Germany by the Duke of Windsor and his ostentatious reception by Hitler and his regime could only be construed as a willingness on the part of the Duke of Windsor to lend himself to those tendencies. Basically, that's a mouthful saying, I can't trust that guy as far as I could throw him because he just got done hanging out with the Nazis. Perhaps you should tread carefully in your associations. Trouble was brewing. The media was also skeptical. London columnist Hannon Swaffer wrote, it's nothing but a publicity stunt. I traveled with the Duke when he was studying housing in Wales, and if he were there for 50 years, he wouldn't know anything more about it than he knows now. Scathing. None of the American unions, who were no fans of Bedeau's industrial practices, responded. Ronald Lindsay reported to the Foreign Office. Tone of the press and trend of opinion as regards Duke of Windsor's tour has been growing even more unfavorable. Language about the Duchess has been unfriendly, but most of all, his prospects have been damaged by association with Bedeau, who is, of course, anathema to labor. A culmination was reached today when a manifesto by Baltimore Federation of Labor was issued attacking the tour of the Duchess, and especially of Bedeau, and fascist tendencies displayed by circumstances of the Duke's recent visit to Germany. Organized labor had long been critical of Bedeau and took their revenge. The American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organization issued statements criticizing his companies and their efficiency policies. The Union of New York Longshoremen announced that they would picket Windsor's ship and not unload any of his luggage. Yeah, because they would have been unloading luggage for the next 17 years if they even began the job. Shares in Bedeau's American companies fell dramatically, and his fellow directors forced him to stand down as president of American Bedeau Associates. A former lover, Louise Booth, presented him with a lawsuit of $250,000, and the Inland Revenue handed him a bill of $202,718. Drama for Bedeau, let me tell you. His associations with Windsor have done him no favors. Bedeau, who took flight to Canada, then Europe, realized the game was up and cabled the Duke, copying in the press. Because of the mistaken attack upon me, oh boo-hoo, everyone's victimizing him. Oh, how sad for him. He says, I was convinced that your proposed tour will be difficult under my auspices. I respectfully implore you to relieve me completely of all duties in connection with it. Bedeau has turned out, because if you were David, David's been living the high life, letting other people sort of direct and decide what he's going to do next and enjoying every minute of not having to make any decisions. It wasn't his idea to go to America, it was Bedeau's idea, and Bedeau was over there burning the midnight oil, making it happen, and, going hither and thither and yon, trying to sort this out, for his own nefarious purposes. It's not like he did that out of his own goodwill. But now, for him to be like, everybody's misunderstanding me, so if you don't mind, I'm going to have to, get out of this one, you understand. And I'd be like, if I were David, I'd be like, no, I don't understand, because I'm on my way over there with my barrel of London water, and now you're trying to tell me that you're not going to be here and you're begging me to let you off. It wasn't my idea. I mean, fine, I guess go, but you said you were going to, so you said this was your idea. So for Bedeau to act like, I respectfully ask you to let me out of these duties, as though somebody's got a whip at his back. The only whip at his back is the one he's whipping himself with. Anyway, the Duke canceled the trip. Lindsay's brother, Lord Crawford, noted in his diary, so the Duke of Windsor has canceled his journey to America. Ronald told me he had put himself hopelessly in the wrong by starting his visit with a preliminary tour in Germany, where he was, of course, photographed fraternizing with the Nazis. Poor little man. He had no sense of his own and no friends with any sense to advise him. I hope this will give him a sharp and salutary lesson. And I don't really know how much David learned from any of this. I don't think if anything, he probably fell back to lick his own wounds and just feel sorry for himself that he'd been led to believe that there was some hope on the horizon of him being able to change his narrative. But if anything, he was no longer going to be able to rely on Bedeau. As it turns out, actually, after he was slapped with this lawsuit from his former lover, and then Inland Revenue hands him that $202,000 bill, he lost 200,000 pounds. He lost all control of his U.S. companies, and then he had a nervous breakdown and ended up in a sanatorium in the Bavarian mountains. So, I'd say that David's association with him was probably effectively canceled after this. The Duke, however, announced that he would in future consider himself no longer a public figure, and this was a wise decision on the tail end of that horrific trip to Germany and then his failed plans to go to America. It seems like he was just trying to start too much too soon, and he really needed to lay low for a while until people were willing to see him again. Which really reminds me of Harry and Meghan, because I think that if they had laid low quietly and then wanted to arrive back on the scene, I think people might have had something to do with them for much longer. But the fact that they just insisted on being in everybody's face for so long really hurt them. So probably the wisest decision David could have made would be to retreat.